southeast of England, where temperatures will quickly fall away and we'll see a touch of frost developing. Elsewhere, holding on to a lot of cloud as we go into Monday morning, but we'll start to see outbreaks of rain across parts of Scotland come the early hours. So for most places underneath the cloud, temperatures generally holding up, so frost-free, but across the far southeast of England and into East Anglia, we could wake up to a touch of frost on Monday morning. But for most of England and Wales, it's going to be a largely dry Monday. Hazy spells of sunshine for some and perhaps the odd shower across the far south. But across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland in particular, turning increasingly wet and windy with heavy spells of rain to come, but mild here with temperatures up to 10 or 11 degrees. Bye-bye.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
A woman of 53 has believed for 18 months she was in an online relationship with Brad Pitt.
I think we're seeing pictures. So these are the pictures that she received that made her believe that she was in this relationship with Brad Pitt.
And you'll see that some of it is in hospital because the scammer was claiming that he was suffering from cancer. This was playing very much on her emotion. So this is a divorcee who lived in Mauritius. She'd received a £700,000 divorce settlement, or £650,000 divorce settlement, I should say, and £700,000 has been taken from her through this scam.
Yeah.
As she was becoming, every time she became suspicious, the money was taken for payment of charges on gifts that she never received, and then hospital fees. There was lots of emotions being played into there. Now, as somebody, I'm a rom-com writer by trade, so I write romantic fiction. And one of the books I've written has actually been about somebody who did online dating, got herself into a whole heap of trouble. Not quite, she wasn't in a relationship with Brad Pitt, but she met somebody dodgy. So because I've written that book, I've met a lot of people who've come up to me and said, oh, it's happened to me.
It's scary in this digital age, isn't it?
They've lost $700,000, but somebody has tried it on. Somebody my question is, would a man go 18 months in a relationship online without seeing somebody and keep it going? Or is this feeding into this neediness of a particular demographic of a woman who that's better than anything else she got going on in her life, was what was being fed to her over the internet? And
then maybe a little bit of her knew, but she kind of just suppressed it because she
was hoping it was Brad Pitt.
Her daughter apparently for a year was saying, this can't be true, come on, think about it. But she just fell for it. But I just wonder, what's right, it's a very sad story. She's obviously now getting a lot of hate and ridicule as well.
Because she's been on French TV and she's had a huge amount of pushback from it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Tominey show here on GB News. Lovely to see you this morning. I've got the former leader of the Conservative Party on the show, Sir Ian Duncan Smith. He's going to be with me in the studio and I'm going to be talking to him about his recent visit to Ukraine. 5 years since Brexit, can you believe it? Reform being ahead of the Tories in every major poll for the first time, and what he makes of Donald Trump's first 2 weeks back in the White House. Also joining me is the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Andrew Griffith. I'll be asking him about why Brexit is seemingly now so unpopular and why the Tories failed to capitalise on so many Brexit opportunities. Labour MP Barry Gardiner will be here. I'm going to be asking him about Labour's plans for a new runway at Heathrow. Spoiler alert, I'm not sure he's in support of Rachel Reeves' plan, and his take on 5 years since the UK left the EU. Is Starmer going to try and get us back into the bloc? Former Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green will also join me in the studio to discuss the future of moderate conservatism and the challenge to the Tories from reform. He's a big Kemi Badenoch backer, so I'll be asking him about her performance in office so far. And as I said, it's 5 years since Brexit, so the author Ross Clarke is going to join me to discuss his book, Far From EU-topia. Do you see what he's done there? Why Europe is failing and how Britain could do better. As ever, we've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead for you this morning, so don't think of going anywhere. But first, we're going to go through the Sunday papers as is normal, and the front pages are a delight this morning. I'm going to discuss them with political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. Lovely to see you, James.
Morning, Camilla.
Now, the Sunday Times has done quite well, because two of its writers, Gabriel Pogrund and Patrick Maguire, have written this new book on Labour, specifically on Keir Starmer. And it's quite revelatory. I mean, I always look at these things and think, who buys a book on Keir Starmer and reads it from start to finish? Is this sort of summer reading for the sadomasochistic? However, they've got some good lines, including the fact that Labour despaired over HR boss Starmer.
Yes.
Concerned about his leadership skills, which is a problem when you want to be Prime Minister, isn't it, James?
Absolutely. Well, I think the big takeaway from the extracts thus far is that Keir Starmer's team think about as much of their own leader as the rest of us, I think, in terms of he seems to be often sometimes uninspiring, a little bit dull as a chap. And this is really the sequel to their first book on Jeremy Corbyn. This is about how Keir Starmer's leadership started in 2020 and up until 2024. Even senior people like Morgan McSweeney, now number 10 chief of staff, thought he was a bit of an HR boss.
Yeah.
There's one line about him supposedly driving the train, but actually it's a DLR, driverless train. And actually, just people were despairing all along the way, and there were various points they thought he was going to lose. Up until 2021, they thought he might not stay as leader. And that, I think, is a big takeaway, really, actually, is that there was always that sense of the project was being made up on the spot. And it's an interesting story about how he came to be Prime Minister and win such a huge majority, given all the odds against him.
He probably didn't think he was going to become Prime Minister. Maybe he thought he was kind of going to be the holding pattern Labour leader, so sort of see what happens to the Conservatives and then maybe hand the baton on to somebody with a bit more charisma. I don't know, Wes Streeting, Rachel Reeves. I noticed another story in one of the papers this morning about them jostling.
Yes, this is the story in 2022 at a time when, of course, it was Beergate, and Keir Starmer was under investigation by Durham Police for potentially breaching lockdown rules. Rachel Reeves and Wes Streeting encountered each other in the voting lobbies. And according to the book, Wes Streeting asked her and said, which of us is it going to be? And Reeves then had to go and vote, and they never addressed the subject again. But those two are probably going to be likely the Chancellor now and the Health Secretary jockeying to replace him at some point.
I would suggest the Health Secretary looks a little more likely than Rachel Reeves right now. I mean, I don't think she's had the best start.
But you've got to remember the electorate's going to be those Labour MPs.
True.
And I think Wes Streeting, as someone said to me, he's a self-made man and he worships his creator.
I've often described him as the most ambitious man in the Labour Party, if not indeed the country. Let's move on, though. Sunday Express front page warning that Keir is edging us back into the EU. And then we've got it mixed in with the Sunday Telegraph's page 1. PM eases rules for illegal migrants. All of this does... I know he said we're not going to go back into the EU, we're not having a second referendum, we're not going to rejoin the customs union, anything like that. But the signs do look as if he wants to align. We've got Olaf Scholz at Chequers today. We've got this Brussels meeting, I think, tomorrow. He's very much EU-focused. Shouldn't he be aligning himself more with Trump in America either?
I think that is the danger, isn't it? Which is that, Britain left the European Union just at a time, of course, when it seems like the rules-based order is sort of coming apart. What are our alliances going to be? Now, from the pro-European side, they look at, someone make the argument to me, which is that, hang on a second, we're being so ambitious with China, going to sending over Rachel Reeves, that $600 million deal a few weeks ago. Why aren't we being a little bit more ambitious on Europe, given how controversial China is vis-a-vis Europe? I do think that Labour sees Europe as the answer to growth in terms of the next 2 to 3 years or so. Obviously, things like Heathrow are sort of 10 years down the line, but we're going to see a variety of different areas. I think chiefly migration. There's also a story in the Mail on Sunday today about potential climate talks as well.
Yes.
And the key challenge, of course, then comes is, what do we have to offer the EU that we don't want to give away? And the big ask seems to be about youth mobility. But of course, I think we need to remember that the Brexit vote was 10 years ago, almost now, 5 years ago since we left the EU. And the nature of young people in the European Union has changed hugely. There's lots of naturalisation gone on, lots of different types of people in terms of, say, for instance, the Turks have had lots of citizenship offered by Bulgaria. There's lots of young Italians and who've had some migrant-based backgrounds. So I think the nature of who be coming here in terms of the under-30s and under-30s would be very different to what the kind of our classical view about who the people will be getting this scheme would be.
This PM easing rules for illegal migrant story then, so this is about legislation that the Tories put in place to say that we needed to have better checks on people coming here because we had bearded adults pretending to be teenagers, but also to say that if you come here seeking asylum, if you come here illegally, then you do not have the right to citizenship, and Labour want to reverse that.
Absolutely. So this is the big bill that's published this week. Second reading's February the 10th, and the two big measures in that are one of which making it slightly easier for illegal migrants to gain a pathway to citizenship, and second of all, as you say, about age verification. And, you know, the UK is one of, I think, only a handful of countries which doesn't typically use as much as others. So France and Germany are very keen to use to validate that, because otherwise you get, as the Telegraph reports, around 1,300 people last year who failed the underage test, and that for, obviously, if they hadn't failed that test, they would then be placed in schools and treated as children, despite being over the age of 18. And I don't think anyone wants it being placed.
But also, if people can come here illegally and then know that they might get the right to citizenship, then that makes us a huge draw, doesn't it? There's no deterrent there at all. It's the antithesis of a deterrent.
Absolutely, it's the incentives. And this is always the argument. So Labour loves to talk about deportations and returns. That's fine, but it's not going to stop the pull of people coming here, particularly if, as the rest of Europe embraces harsher measures, and you see what's happening in Germany right now, the UK might be seen as a soft touch on the verge of the EU.
Should we talk about Lucy Letby? I mean, this story keeps on gaining momentum. Mail on Sunday front page, police files raise doubt about Letby guilt. And there's going to be a press conference this week. And one of the experts whose research was relied upon to suggest that some of the babies in her care had suffered from air embolisms is going to come forward and say that his research has been misinterpreted. We've also got some data suggesting that the police file shows that she wasn't there for a third of these deaths, but the jury never got to hear that. What's your general instinct on this?
Well, I think that, obviously, there's been a huge amount of press examination and scrutiny, and I think if you look over all the detail, I suspect there'd be a number of cases in this country which wouldn't probably have been mishandled in some way. So I think it's good that we're obviously trying to look at and investigate this case in more detail. This all comes from Unheard obtaining the witness notes on the justice notes which this case was based, and so they're going to look into it more. And obviously David Davis has played a huge part of this in Parliament in investigating.
He's really stuck his neck out and basically said she's innocent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what is happening is that people are increasingly challenging the view that this was beyond reasonable doubt. People think she still did it, probably, but that, hang on, all these set cases, was she involved in all of them? So I think it's going to be investigated. We'll see what happens.
It's two different things to be saying. I think she might be the victim of a miscarriage of justice or need a retrial, and she's actually innocent. I think what most people are trying to say here is that the trial doesn't seem to have relied on accurate evidence. Therefore, it needs to be re-examined, which is not quite the same as saying she's innocent. Give her a new trial so that we can examine it all properly and then let the jury decide. But where this goes is anyone's guess. And then finally, let's just have a little word about the royals. Focus on my work, not my wardrobe, says Kate. Having covered the royal family, I can say I have written a couple of pieces about her nude high heels and her this hat and this dress. And maybe it does detract from the work. Although people quite like to know what royals are wearing. They help to champion up-and-coming designers, British fashion. Surely people can be interested in her wardrobe and her work at the same time.
Absolutely, and from the reports we understand it's actually, the Princess of Wales' own frustration with this, that they're not getting the work. But I would argue that one follows the other, and actually it's the perfect paper story, it's the perfect online story that you peg the latest work that they're doing to the wonderful outfits that they're wearing. And I know lots of girls my age and women who are in their 20s and 30s who go on Instagram and love looking at pictures of Kate Middleton. They see her as a fashion icon. They love looking at images of her. And, of course, that then says underneath the worthy work she's doing. And I think we both know we're fairly cynical about the news business. It's difficult to land good news stories, but obviously it helps if you've got someone who is seen as a beacon of British fashion, and that's what she is. So I think maybe there's a sense perhaps it's seen as sort of somehow sexist or outdated, but I think it's very respectful. It's commenting on her wardrobe, and I think it's helped a lot of designers.
Also, she looks so great that it then projects her onto the front page, and it might be a picture of her on the front page, and then turn to page 3 and you can have all of the detail, which is quite prominent reporting of charitable endeavours. Other royals will probably give their eye teeth to get that kind of prominent coverage in the newspapers. James Heal, thank you very much. You're back at The Spectator this week reporting. We look forward to reading what you'll be writing. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to the former Tory leader, Sir Ian Duncan Smith. But first, if you're in search of some winter sun, oh, if only. It's February already and I want some winter sun. I want some summer sun, I think. Then the forecast for some top European holiday destinations is just to come now. Back in a moment.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello. Well, it's rather unsettled across the central Mediterranean. Heavy showers, rain in parts of Spain as well, but there are some drier spells. So across the Canary Islands, we'll see some showers, but across Gibraltar and the south of Spain, some outbreaks of rain here. An area of low pressure will bring some heavy showers and thunderstorms across central parts of the Mediterranean, but there will be some drier spells in between. And then looking ahead, well, plenty of sunshine on offer, and it should be feeling pleasant in that sunshine too.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Have you noticed that more and more stores are closing? Well, last year, apparently 13,000 stores closed for the last time on the high street.
Well, experts warn the worst is still to come for our small businesses.
Well, let's talk to retail expert Jeremy Baker. Good morning to you, Jeremy. How bad is it and what can be done?
Well, nothing can be done about it. Retail is like that. It's a boom and bust operation. So last year, let's say you had a shop and it was booming. This year, the consumer can just change their mind. They don't need to come back to your shop ever again.
Well, it is sad, Jeremy, because our high streets are the beating heart of our communities, aren't they? And for many people, I know I can relate to my high street, it is such a depressing sight, walking down there and seeing them all boarded up and closed down.
But how often do you walk down that boarded up high street? I think people move on to something else. The online world is very big, and lots of other things are very exciting. And so people, you know, the shop. I like to go to my GP in a shopping centre and get my tests done there rather than tramp off all the way to the GP, for example. And children could go to little schools in the high street. I've seen that happen already. So lots of things could happen to the high street. It could be much more a social centre, much more kind of like pubs, coffee shops, all that. Charities. I don't see anything wrong with charities taking over. But the idea of the shop-centred high street finished, that's gone. Never coming back. Goodbye. It's not sad, it's just life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Former Tory leader and the MP for Chingford and Woodford Green, Sir Ian Duncan Smith, joins me in the studio. Lovely to see you, Sir Ian, and you've just come back from Ukraine. We were just talking about it in the break there.
Yeah.
And it's quite a stark warning that you've brought back to the UK. It's in the Mail on Sunday. It's a double-page spread. I do urge you to go and read it because you basically spoke to military people out there and they're saying we've got about 6 months left. And you're very worried about capitulation on the behalf of the West on this.
At worst, they said we've got 6 months, and it's getting close to worst. At best, I guess, maybe a year or so. But they're running out of ammunition. The weapons that were promised to them still haven't all arrived. The ammunition hasn't arrived. They said to me starkly, look, for every round we chuck over at them, they'll chuck 4, 5 or more. You know, they just completely outgun us. And then we've got to move. It's a drone war now. This has changed warfare forever. So you can't loiter anywhere. You've got to move fast because the drones will pick you up and then artillery comes in, or else they just dive in and explode on you. It's really brutal. They don't have the manpower that Russia has, so they're fighting. They need the equipment desperately. Russia loses about 1,500 men a day. They don't care. They just throw waves of people at them, and they're just, you know, they can't resist to a degree. So it is very dangerous. They're brave people. They do believe in their democracy and their freedom. And of all countries, that we should be recognising this is our fight. I'm not asking us to put troops on the ground, but I am saying that America and Europe need to do much, much more to give them the tools, as Churchill asked for. Give us the tools and we'll finish the job. And they can do that, but not if we don't give them the help and support.
And what's your message to Donald Trump on this? Because we know he's basically saying, you know, this isn't our war to fight, but it's bigger than America's isolationist policy.
It's what I wrote in the article. I said, look, if Ukraine goes down, then Russia and China, who are tied together, you know, literally tied together. China supports Russia. It's got North Korea giving it arms and weapons. Iran was involved in supporting them, again brokered by China. China's watching. If Russia succeeds, China will be emboldened on Taiwan. And America says we'll have to support Taiwan. It'll be too late by then. I wrote the last line, I said, the road to Taiwan now runs through Ukraine. And unless America wakes up to that fast, and Europe, by the way, then we'll find ourselves in the 1930s all over again. You know, we gave away the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia thinking it would appease Hitler. He didn't. He took Czechoslovakia. He then went on to Poland, then invaded Russia, invaded France. All of this happens by dictators tell you what they want. Putin has told us clearly he wants Ukraine, and then he's going to look at the other ex-Soviet territories. He's told us that. Xi in China has told us he wants Taiwan and a greater China, and he's committing genocide. He uses slave labour. All of this, what do? We do absolutely nothing.
Well, I tell you what we are doing, apparently giving the green light to a massive Chinese embassy next to Tower Bridge.
I agree. It's the wrong place, certainly.
I mean, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, apparently is minded to allow this thing to go ahead. What's your reaction to that?
It'll be the biggest kowtow in British history. It'll be us on bended knee, maybe on our faces, saying to China, please, 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 just give us some trade. They're not going to do anything about that. And by the way, they're about to dump cheap electric cars on the UK market. Europe is looking at tariffs on those. We aren't at all. We have become absolutely facile. And I worry about that enormously. I say to the government, you're taking the wrong course. It doesn't work with China. China doesn't care about the UK. They just want to grow and to be dominant.
And are you as suspicious as others are that they want to strategically be in that area of London because they can try and intercept underground cables?
There are underground cables going past. We know that none of the local residents want it in Tower Hamlets. We know the council doesn't want it. We know that there are 200 British citizens living in the grounds that would become Chinese territory because they have their flats and apartments there. This would be a nightmare. They would be literally governed under Chinese law.
Is this naivety or stupidity?
Well, MI5 doesn't want them. We know MI5 and MI6 are utterly opposed to it.
So why aren't Rayner and Starmer listening to it?
Because they're in the game of cozying up to China at the moment. I mean, I know lots of Labour MPs that are deeply worried now about their position over China. Really, a lot of them. IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. We have 40 countries globally. We have a lot of Labour MPs involved and a growing number. Okay. And they are very worried about this. So it's not just a case of a Tory attacking Labour. It's the other way around.
So you could say cozying up to China, but not necessarily to Trump. What do you make? You were involved. You have some link to Trump sort of offering us a trade deal back in the day. Was it 2018 when he came and the blimp was put in the sky by or sanctioned by Sadiq Khan? You know that Trump wants a trade deal because you discussed it with him personally. What happened here?
Well, I don't know how we managed to get in, but I got in to see Trump when he was here for the state visit. I've got a good friend in America who was able to get us in. He had a spare time. He was very happy to see us. And we talked about trade. I had about 45 minutes with him, I think. And I was struck by two things. First of all, he immediately said he was very keen. He loved Britain. He loves the monarchy, by the way. He said, I love this country. It's a great country. You know, we want to get closer to it. And we'd had a problem over prolonged discussions on trade. And I said there was an easier way to do it. You do it sector by sector. You leave the bad bits, difficult bits till last. And he said, at the moment he looked at me and went, and I was with another colleague, and he said, I like these guys. We're going to do their deal. And the then ambassador said, no, there's no deal here. And he said, no.
What was that, Willie Johnson at the time?
We're going to do the deal. And the thing is, he wants to have a trade deal.
Yes.
He's made it clear. If he's going to slap tariffs on the European Union, we should be focusing on getting a deal done with him, because it is our single biggest trading partner. We actually have a slight trade surplus with America. We have a massive trade deficit, and have had forever, with Europe and with China. So we should be turning to how we maximise our trade.
Is Peter Mandelson the man to help negotiate this? Does Nigel Farage need to, in the interest of the country, go and try and help broker a deal with Trump?
Well,
how should it work?
I mean, he's always welcome to go and do what he likes with President Trump. But my view is Trump actually does like the UK. And, Biden didn't.
Yes.
Let's be honest, Biden was pretty cheap over the UK. But he does like the UK. And notice he's kept it out of all his talks about the countries he's angry with.
Yeah.
He was very clear to me about financial services, that between America and Britain, we really could rocket boost financial services for us. All of that, I think, he understands. So, whatever else people feel about him, it is the government's job to make sure that the UK does not suffer if there are disputes, and that we have this opportunity to do trade. So whoever's the ambassador, if Peter Mandelson is, I would say to him, make that your priority.
Now, you were one of the Brexit Spartans, a long-time Eurosceptic. What do you make of some of the polling on Brexit now, 5 years on from the signing of that withdrawal agreement? Just 3 in 10 Britons now say that it was right for the UK to vote to leave. Got 55% saying it was wrong for the country to have left. It's, a story of regret. Do you feel
actually,
regrets?
the polling is interesting because it doesn't actually say that it's moved dramatically. What it says is that about 47, 48 people would still vote to stay and the others wouldn't. But there was a very interesting piece by John Curtis the other day who said, when you ask them...
The polling guru, just to remind people.
When you ask them what they're really after, is that they wanted more change and that they'd be prepared to support that. The story about Brexit is we've got to be bold by taking advantage. Number one, I wrote a paper called the Tigger Report.
Yes.
Task Force
Well,
on
you gave
Innovation.
it to Boris Johnson.
We did.
And it got ignored.
Well, some of it was done, but not enough.
Isn't the story of Brexit, and I'm sorry to say this as a former leader of the party, that the Tories absolutely bungled this, that you had Brexit opportunities that you should have maximised, failed to do so while you were in government, and now no one can be surprised as the arch-Remainer, Keir Starmer, takes over and is now talking about realigning with the EU. If the Conservatives had done a good job originally, we wouldn't be in this mess.
I don't disagree with you. All I would say is the number one key element that was part of this, which we didn't do, which was to maximise the re-arrival of English common law over our regulations. Get rid of the European legal change over regulations and make them under common law, which is far less intrusive, and make sure that, therefore, you don't step in to regulate unless it's clear and obvious evidence that some damage is being done. That's the way that it always worked. And by the way, the common law is shared all over the Anglosphere. America, Canada, all the Far East now are wanting all their business sections done in common law. And so we are the architects of the original best law in the world. What we have failed to do is bring it back across all of the elements that we should do and maximise that. Free trade comes from the back of that. As I keep saying, America wants a trade deal. Why is that made easier for us? Because we are both users of common law. That means our financial services work very easily with theirs, and that's why our trade with them is so big. But biggest investor in America? The UK.
I know.
Biggest investor in the UK? America.
And yet,
there's a reason for that, and then we can maximise that.
And that you have to admit that the Tories have squandered not only their opportunity, but also a lot of their electorate on the back of failures to deliver. Brexit, OK, we can talk about high tax, we can talk about high immigration. It's a problem for your party, isn't it, that we've now got 3 different polls, I think, this week, putting reform ahead, not just of you, but ahead of Labour. When it comes to delivering on Brexit, people trust Nigel Farage more than Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah, we're in a peculiar time politically in flux because this government has the biggest majority it's ever had, but it had it on 33% of the poll, which has never been heard of before. The right of the political spectrum has divided itself between the two. I understand all of that. These are problems. But I still think that at the end of it all, the Conservative Party will be the party that is the only one that will be able to deliver. Now, others will argue, Reform are there, they're going to rise up. We don't know where they're going. You don't know what happens when they come under the test of what are their policies, how will they work.
People will argue. You had 14 years to deliver.
I understand that. I have argued all along for us to be doing all of those things that we've just been talking about, for us to have maximised the benefits of Brexit, for us to have made sure that the Conservatives did the things we were asked to do by controlling the immigration, etc. All of this, we got hit by COVID, we got hit again by what happened after the Ukraine war. These knocked us off, to be fair. What we need to do is get back to the basics of being a Conservative and show that this has historical roots in everything that we do, and it's not just a temporary party.
So Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio this morning. I do urge you to read his piece in the Mail on Sunday. Still to come on the Camilla Tominey show today, Shadow Trade Secretary Andrew Griffith, the Labour MP Barry Gardiner will also be joining me, plus I'll speak to the former Conservative MP and Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green and the author Ross Clark. Going to reflect on 5 years since Brexit and much, much more. So we'll see you very, very shortly. Don't go anywhere.
We're giving you not one, but 2 chances to win this month, with 2 prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash. But that's not all. You'll also get a brand new iPhone 16 and a £500 shopping voucher to spend at your favourite store. So why not be extra lucky this month? For a chance to win an iPhone, vouchers and £10,000 in cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And fashionistas are keen to see which new trends are set to hit the catwalk.
Well, our next guest is very well placed to share her predictions with us after being a contestant on hit ITV series Dress the Nation, as well as being an upcycling and sewing consultant.
Wow. Joining us now is Tendai Murewe. I want to go back to you appearing on the ITV Dress the Nation.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like?
Oh, that was one of my highlights as a upcycling consultant. I learned to sew in my kitchen 5 years ago. And then, during COVID, just making masks. Then the next thing I was on a Dress the Nation, making dresses in front of TV. Yeah, it was just incredible. I think we all had all these clothes that we have, but we don't know what to do with them. So mainly I started with men's jackets, taking off the sleeves and putting it like a print on.
I've tried this. I've tried taking off my sleeves before. I now have about 3 jackets with no sleeves. I never managed to put them back on.
You need to come to a workshop. You need to come to a workshop.
I need an upcycling consultant. 2025, what can we expect fashion-wise?
I think bold prints are back. People are loving. I think you walk on the streets in frollals and oversized men's jackets.
So the exact opposite. We have drastically underperformed this morning. You're just saying not like us.
We just woke up this morning and thought it's winter, it's cold, it's grey.
Grey, miserable.
Is that not the way to go?
No, it is. It's still, I think because fashion is expressive. It's whatever you want to express yourself.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show here on GB News. Shadow Business and Trade Secretary Andrew Griffith will be joining us on the programme shortly. What does he think about the Tories' legacy 5 years on from Brexit? Plus, I'm going to be joined by the Labour MP Barry Gardiner. What are his thoughts on the new runway at Heathrow? And former Conservative MP and Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green will join me to discuss the ongoing threat to the Tories from reform. And Ross Clark will be here to discuss his new book, Far From Utopia, Why Europe is Failing and How Britain Could Do Better. But first, here's your news headlines with Sam Francis.
Camilla, thank you very much, and good morning to you. We're just coming up to 1 minute past 10. The top story from the newsroom this morning: the UK is set to become the first country in the world to criminalise owning AI tools that create images of child sexual abuse. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says offenders could face up to 5 years in prison under the new crackdown. Owning so-called AI paedophile manuals could carry a 3-year sentence. Ministers warn that AI-generated images are being used to blackmail children and push them into live streaming their abuse. In the US, tariffs have been imposed on its 3 largest trading partners, China, Mexico and Canada, starting on Tuesday. Canada and Mexico are facing a 25% tax, while China will see an additional 10% on top of its existing tariffs. China says it firmly opposes the levies and plans to file a lawsuit with the WTO. The White House, though, says the tariffs are necessary to combat drug trafficking and illegal immigration. Well, overnight, both Canada and Mexico hit back inevitably, and here's what Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, had to say.
I am announcing Canada will be responding to the US trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
Well, Donald Trump also signalled that he intends to impose punitive tariffs on the European Union, which he has said has treated America very terribly.
The European Union charges us 20% plus a VAT tax, called a VAT tax, very similar, and it costs us an absolute fortune. We are treated so badly, and we have a tremendous deficit with the European Union, so we'll be doing something very substantial.
And the Prime Minister is being urged today to start talks on a new customs union with the EU, with the Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey claiming it would boost the UK's economy and strengthen trade against the US. Sir Keir Starmer is in Germany today for talks with Chancellor Olaf Scholz ahead of a European retreat, where defence cooperation is expected to top the agenda there. Labour is also facing scrutiny over a donation linked to the EU, and the Conservatives are warning the Prime Minister not to accept any further EU influence. But Sir Keir Starmer has said that there is still work to be done.
I've been very clear that I don't think the deal that we've got with the EU is good enough, and that's why we are resetting that and looking for a better deal, whether that's on security and defence, hugely important, but also on trade.
Those are the latest headlines. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at the top of the next hour. Now, though, it's back to Westminster and Camilla.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you for that, Sam. Lots more still to come on the show today. I'm going to be speaking with Shadow Business and Trade Secretary Andrew Griffith, the Labour MP Barry Gardiner, and former Deputy PM Damien Green will be here in the studio. But first, Shadow Business and Trade Secretary Andrew Griffiths joins me. Lovely to see you this morning, Mr. Griffith. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I see that the Conservatives have put out 5 Brexit tests for the Labour Party. They're saying we must have no backsliding on free movement, no new money must be paid to the EU, no reduction in our fishing rights, no rule-taking or dynamic alignment or European court jurisdiction, no compromise on the primacy of NATO as the cornerstone of European security. But can I be frank? The only reason why we are now worrying about the Labour government backsliding into the EU and Brussels is because the Conservatives, while in office, failed to maximise on Brexit. You failed to capitalise on the opportunities. And now we're in this mess of worrying whether we're going to have realignment.
Well, the opportunities were always going to come over time. I think many of them have been realised already. The work I formerly did as City Minister with the then Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, we did a very significant amount to make the most of our Brexit freedoms in financial services. But you are quite right. I wouldn't dispute for one moment that we need to go further and faster. You can see the pace at which the US is making the most of its opportunities as an independent legislator. But the key point about the 5 tests that we've laid out, particularly that about not going back and being a rule taker, is we will have the freedom as a future Conservative government to do precisely that.
But people will be asking why you didn't use those opportunities when you were in office. I mean, you talk about maximising post-Brexit opportunities, and we can talk about free ports and what have you, but under the Conservatives, corporation tax went up by 6%. That was never going to make us more competitive. People might not have wanted us to kind of turn into Singapore on sea, but we didn't do anything like what we needed to do to deregulate, cut red tape and make ourselves more attractive to foreign investors post-Brexit.
Well, Camilla, there's a great deal more that I would like to see us do. The Conservative Party is under new leadership. We sadly are not in power. The electorate delivered their verdict on us for a number of reasons. But the key thing we can control going forward is formulating those plans, holding the government to account as we are, as I am. That's why we've been very clear with Keir Starmer about what he's not to be doing, going off to Brussels tomorrow, selling out this country. Actually, I'd much rather he was on a plane to the United States. That's the big opportunity. It's an opportunity we wouldn't have if we hadn't taken advantage of Brexit. We hadn't got control back for our trade policy for the first time in 42 years. In that period, we actually made pretty good use of that. 73 trade deals, including with some of the fastest growing countries on the planet, as well as righting historic wrongs with Australia, Canada and New Zealand. So, you know, there's always more to do. I wish we'd done more. What I and Kemi Badenoch, as the Conservative Party is under new leadership, is formulate policies to take advantage of that going forward.
But Ian Duncan-Smith has just been in the studio, and I know you've been doing other interviews, so you probably didn't catch it. He basically revealed that Trump offered the Conservatives a trade deal back in 2018. I mean, at the time, the US Ambassador Woody Johnson sort of tried to get the President to sort of stop talking, but he was absolutely open to doing a free trade deal with Great Britain at the time when he was last president. Why didn't the Tories capitalise on that? Why didn't the Tories capitalise on his obvious love of Britain, love of the royal family and special relationship with the UK?
Well, Camilla, I'm not sure I was in Parliament, let alone government at that time, so I'll defer to Ian. Ian himself has done some fantastic work about Brexit freedoms in the past. The work he did on the Tigger report with others was one of the documents of reference that I used when we did have the opportunity to make new laws to regulate our financial services, a really important sector of the economy. As Shadow Trade and Business Secretary, I'm engaging with businesses right now. If you just look at the life sciences, you know, we want to take advantage of new developments in genetics, AI. Those are freedoms that we can use. Sadly, only this week we saw the Labour government screw up a deal that was already done with AstraZeneca, which would have brought hundreds of jobs, millions of pounds worth of investment, more capability to our economy. So I can't right all of the wrongs of the past, Camilla, but what we under new leadership are focused on is making the most of those opportunities going forward.
The Sunday Mirror travelled out to a very true blue constituency this week, Harlow East, and asked voters there about Kemi Badenoch. More than half of the voters in this very Conservative constituency didn't recognise her and didn't know who she was. Is that a problem for the Conservatives?
Well, it would be if there was an election tomorrow, Camilla, but there isn't. And if you go back and look, we're going to have the 50th anniversary of Mrs Thatcher, someone who inspired me, one of the reasons why I went into politics and one of the reasons why I'm confident that we can once again have a Conservative government and improve the standing of this country in the world. If you look at her early period between 1976 and 1979, of course it takes time for any leader to get the country to know them well. And when they do, I'm very confident they will like Kemi's clear thinking, her confidence, her conservative principles, and I, as part of her team, are working every day to hold this government to account. If we can be a competent opposition, you know, that's a start on the road back.
Sure, but do you agree then that at the moment she's failing to cut through?
Well, look, I haven't seen the data. You won't be surprised to know that the Sunday Mirror is not top of my weekend reading. My key point is I think Kemi's leading the Conservative Party well. No one who loves and cares for the Conservative Party would say anything other than we have a great deal of work to do after that historic defeat in July. But the job of work is to get on and do precisely that now.
I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions about foreign issues, if you don't mind, Mr Griffiths. First of all, Ian Duncan-Smith has been very vocal in his opposition to this super Chinese embassy just near Tower Bridge. Apparently Angela Rayner is minded to give it the green light. What do you think?
Look, I'm not across that issue in detail. Ian's got a long track record on these matters, and he's been more right than wrong, I think, over time on the geopolitical risks faced by China.
OK. And second of all, I want to just ask you about UNRWA. That's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Now, there's been concerns about this agency and its links to Hamas in the past. I'm asking you because we've got a British-Israeli, Emily Damari, who's now thankfully back in the hearts and arms of her family now, having been held captive for more than 450 days. We've found out that where she was held captive was actually an UNRWA facility. So we think that she wasn't given any access to medical treatment during the 15 months that she was held hostage. Do we think that UNRWA is fit for purpose, Mr Griffith?
No.
Would you like to expand on that?
Well, I certainly think the government was wrong to restore funding to UNRWA, and the reports that I have read about the conduct of its so-called employees and its links that have been discovered after the event with Hamas raise real questions.
OK, thank you for that. And finally, is it a problem, do you think, that Nigel Farage, not least when we have some polling from this week, all revealing that reform is ahead not just of the Tories but also of Labour, is it a problem that Nigel Farage seems to have a better relationship with Donald Trump than Kemi Badenoch?
Well, the person that should have the relationship with Donald Trump right now, he wouldn't have been my first choice, but right now is Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, and I greatly regret I greatly regret the fact that far from immediately dropping the disastrous plan to give away our sovereignty over Chagos, apologising for the student union politics comments that he and his ministers have made in the past, and getting around the table in force and at pace, that we're not seeing any of those things. And in fact, Keir Starmer is once again off tomorrow on another trip to Brussels. It's not bad to talk about security and defence with our neighbours, but really the big opportunity for growth in the UK would be a better, closer trading relationship with our longest ally and largest trading partner in the US.
But Mrs Badenoch needs to get alongside Donald Trump too, doesn't she? I mean, she has met with JD Vance, but I don't believe she's met the US president.
Oh, look, I mean, I think many of us in the Conservatives have very close links with the Republican Party, the people around them. I'm looking to ensure that, from a business and trade perspective, that we learn everything we can about this administration, which is doing great work in terms of pushing back against the diversity agenda, hacking back some of the federal agencies in the US, being a government that's properly on the side of business. There are close links between the Conservatives and the Republican Party, but I don't want to let anyone off the hook. The reality is it's the Prime Minister, it's the government of the day that needs to be in the room getting that trade deal done, not trying to sell us out once again in Brussels.
All right, Andrew Griffith, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you. Well, Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green is going to be in the studio shortly, and also we're going to be speaking to the Labour MP for Brent West, Barry Gardiner. He'll be giving us his thoughts 5 years on from Brexit. Don't forget that he was a Remainer, quite closely aligned with Keir Starmer back in the day. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Back in just a moment.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
That's football.
Well,
you know, it's the hope that kills you.
It does. It gives you highs, it gives you lows. I mean, if you're an Everton fan at the moment, you probably had far too many lows. But as you know, I'm a Nottingham Forest fan.
Well, you must be having a huge high.
But you know, you had one of the greatest footballers ever to grace the game, right? And that was Dixie Dean.
Yeah, absolutely. William Ralph Dean. Didn't like being called Dixie, but that was his nickname. And he was born in 1907. He was my grandfather's best mate. I'm an Everton shareholder. I've been, you know, attached to the club all my life, and so was my father, so was my grandfather, our greatest ever player.
So back in the day when players like Dixie Dean were playing football for big crowds in, you know, a proper...
72,000.
Yeah, a proper working class sport back in the day, weren't it, football? Not like it is today. You've got to be pretty wealthy to afford a ticket.
Even in the 70s, right, and I've seen some, you know, I do like looking back on the football that I watched as a kid. Even in the 70s now, I've seen pictures of the turnstiles, as we used to call them, with a sign at the top, 5 shillings for the Eastern Terrace. 5 shillings. Yeah. Last time I turned down a ticket to go to a football match was Arsenal, who wanted me to pay £830 for a seat in an executive lounge. And though I could have afforded it, because I've worked all my life like you, I just thought at that point, that's ridiculous.
Well,
you know?
you should have told him you were Keir Starmer's security man. You'd have probably got him for nothing.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But you know, you go back to the the 1930s and 1940s, even the 1960s and 70s. You know, the footballers would walk to the ground and play a game, and then walk back and go for a few beers in the pub.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Joining me now is the Labour MP for Brent West, Barry Gardiner. Mr. Gardiner, lovely to see you this morning. Let's have a chat about Brexit. You and I have often disagreed in the past about this subject. What do you reckon, Barry? We're 5 years on now from the signing of the withdrawal agreement, nearly 10 years on from that referendum. It's hard to believe it's been a decade. What do you think? Brexit, a success or a failure?
Well, look, let's measure it by what we were told, Camilla. We were told we would take back control of our money, our borders, and our laws. So let's look at the money first, okay? If you look at UK debt, it is now at £2.67 trillion, 97% of our GDP. Back when we decided to go into the EU, it was more than £500 billion less at 81.3% of GDP. That's the money. Okay. So let's look at the borders. The year that's last on the record, 23, is now recorded as having seen net migration into the UK of 906,000. When we went into the EU, it was 335,000 at the
Okay,
referendum.
yes.
Now let's look at laws. The government actually established a dashboard to set out all the European laws that had to be transposed into UK law. That dashboard shows that there are 6,900 laws that the Conservative government recognised we would have to spend time and money recreating in the UK. So in terms of control of our money, it's worse. In terms of our borders, migration has increased. And in terms of our laws, we're actually importing almost 7,000 at huge waste of time and expense in Parliament into the UK.
Okay. All right, counter narrative to that.
I don't think it's done what they said it was going to do. It's as simple as that.
But then do we blame the Brexit vote itself or the Tories' failure to deliver it? And equally, doesn't Labour, the Liberal Democrats and other people who kept on opposing the withdrawal agreement, kept on opposing Theresa May, aren't they also to blame? The whole thing sort of got, you know, I can't really use the word that I want to use on a Sunday morning. It got bungled. The whole thing was bungled because nobody could really agree what it looked like. And also, you've cited figures there, and I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Gardner, but at the same time, Project Fear never materialised either, did it? We haven't had mass exoduses of businesses because of Brexit. We've had economic calamity because of COVID. We've now got some economic calamity because of the last budget. But it's not all Brexit's fault.
Look, when Labour were last in office, we had 1.6 trillion, 71% ratio of debt to GDP. And that, remember, was after the global financial crash. We now have 2.67, over £1 trillion more debt than we had then. And we're now at 97% of GDP. I think that shows you just how bad things really have got in this country. And you say, well, was it the Tories or was it a combination of the Tories and Brexit? Well, yes, I think it was both.
But when you talk about our debt burden, what's the solution now that Labour are in power, Mr. Gardner? Should we have an era of austerity?
No, not at all. I think, look, part of the problem was the era of austerity. It was austerity, which, you know, the Liberals and the Conservatives pushed in place up to 2015. Then we had the chaos of the Brexit negotiations that you rightly point out. And then we had what you yourself called a bungled Brexit. Well, look, the 2019 election was supposed to be about getting Brexit done. The government should not have signed a deal if they thought it was a bad deal. And if you remember, that's what people at the time kept saying in the opposition. When I was in the opposition, we were saying this is not a good deal.
All right.
So they shouldn't have signed it. But look, what do we do now? And that's the right question to ask. And I think the answer to that is we have to grow our economy. We have to reduce debt as a proportion of our economy, and we have to grow that economy. And that, of course, is exactly what Rachel Reeves was trying to set out at the beginning of this week.
Aha, so she sets out a growth plan which includes expansion of Heathrow, a third runway, and then Labour MPs like you oppose it.
Absolutely. Look, there's much in the package that Rachel set out, which I think was exemplary. If you look at the East-West Rail Link, that should have been the first thing that was done instead of HS2 starting at London, right? They should have done that railway across the country in the north and then moved south. So great that we're doing that. It's great that we're talking about clusters, absolutely right. And it's really marvellous that we're talking about a European Silicon Valley between Oxford and Cambridge. These are really good ideas for growth. But, you know, if you look at the way in which the economy has gone, 0.1% of the economy was in relation to the old fossil fuel economy last year. 9% growth was from the new economy in renewables and the new technologies. So I think Rachel's looking backwards when she looks at Heathrow. That was a project of the past. It's not a project of the future. Business is increasingly done digitally. The business, actually, if you look at the goods that are coming into our country, that's a problem for us. We don't want more coming in.
Hang on, Mr. Gardner, you're a London MP, right? You're a London-based MP. There's forecast that expansion of Heathrow will create thousands, if not tens of thousands of new jobs. We've got a situation where passenger numbers have gone up at the airport. They're now at 84 million. Let's look at a close comparison. Frankfurt. I think Frankfurt has about 64 million passengers passing through it every year. It already has 4 runways. You're being a Luddite about it, Mr. Gardner, because perhaps you're worried about your constituents.
No, not at all. Look, of course I'm worried. I'm always concerned for my constituents. That's what an MP is for. But it's not my constituents who would have two bulldozed villages in their constituency. That's what the runway would entail. But it's also the moving of the M25. All of this, and you rightly talk about 10,000 jobs and skilled workers coming there, doing that. And that means that they're not going to be doing that growth in the rest of the country where it's so badly needed, right? You talk about the number of runways that Frankfurt has. Well, actually, our biggest competitor in terms of hub airports and international passengers is actually Dubai. Dubai, interestingly enough, has only 2 runways. It's just exceeded Heathrow as the #1 international passenger airport in the world. It only has 2 runways. Now, the growth that we need is actually to be spread around the country, and it must, of course, be compliant with our targets for emissions in terms of climate change. Heathrow cannot do that. And for all the good work that's being done on sustainable aviation fuel, which is great, and we need that to meet our 2050 targets, the report that came out last week showed that even if we met the 42% of aviation fuel being sustainable, any growth in the aviation sector would eat that up, and we would still be actually using as much fossil fuels in 2050 as we are today. That cannot happen.
All right, you've mounted a really good argument against expanding Heathrow, and I do see your perspective from the idea that you're, of course, representing a London constituency. Let me ask you about another thing, because it's come up twice today on the show. This Chinese super embassy in Tower Hamlets. The local people there are dead set against it, and yet Angela Rayner is now minded to give it the green light. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has also suggested it should be approved. What do you think, Mr. Gardner? Because local people there are really against it.
I haven't seen the plans for the building and wouldn't know why. I don't know whether it's because of the transport links or whether it's because of the nature of the building or what is being knocked down to put it there. I'm not really the person to comment. But obviously it has to be done. Planning is a quasi-judicial function, both of the local authority and ultimately of the Secretary of State for local government.
To take the conversation full circle, Mr. Gardner, on Brexit, it is interesting, isn't it, that The Observer today, hardly a sort of bastion of right-wing thinking, has done an interesting page lead talking about how far Reform are in a number of different polls this week. They're ahead of the Conservatives, but they're also ahead of Labour. Moving forward, if we have all of this talk about Starmer realigning with the EU, it's going to massively alienate voters in the Red Wall, isn't it, who did vote for Boris Johnson in 2019, felt disappointed by the failure to deliver Brexit and then reverted back to Labour. Aren't you quite worried about Nigel Farage and the impact he might have on Labour voters the next time we go to the polls?
Well, look, I'm concerned in 2 ways. I'm concerned that the public need to know that they are getting what they actually voted for at the previous election, actually, when they voted to leave the EU. They haven't, and that's what the beginning of our conversation showed so clearly. In terms of control of borders, money and laws, that hasn't happened. So let's now look and say, well, what is it that people now are saying they need? Because the EU, leaving the EU, Brexit has failed them on that front. So we now need to say, how do we get more money in people's pockets? How do we stop the crime on people's streets? How do we make sure that their children have good jobs to go to and a prosperous future in the long term? Not just the jobs of the past, but the jobs of the future in biotechnology, in AI, in renewables. This is the way our society is changing, and we have to have a vision for that. I don't want to redo the arguments of 10 years ago when we were discussing, will we leave, won't we leave, then we had the referendum. I want to be looking at the vision that we have for the future. And that, I think, is something that Labour can offer that Reform is not seeking to offer at all. It's not talking about those things. It's not talking about AI. It's not talking about the way in which we need biotechnology revolution. It's not talking about these new technologies. It's so important for our people that those jobs and that growth is there.
Mr. Gardner, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to former Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green. He's going to be here in the studio. Don't forget that he did campaign for Remain. He was very closely aligned with Theresa May. So maybe we'll drill into what went wrong with that Chequers deal. Did the rot set in back then? Maybe that's the question to be asking Damien Green. He'll be up next. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. So we'll see sunnier spells in the southeast today, cloudier elsewhere with some patchy rain, especially in the west. So through this morning it's been a cold but bright start across the southeastern parts of England, and we'll hold on to the sunshine as we go through this morning and into the afternoon. A lot of cloud though elsewhere, especially across Scotland, running down to northwest England into Wales and the southwest of England. Here we'll see patchy outbreaks of rain at times, but turning much drier and brighter across Northern Ireland. Temperatures generally around average, highs of 8 to 9 degrees, but feeling pleasant in any sunshine. Now, as we go through Sunday evening, that cloud and rain across parts of Scotland will clear its way eastwards. We'll hold on to clear skies for a time, especially across western Scotland to start the night. And similar picture across Northern Ireland as well, with clear skies here to start. But we hold on to a lot of cloud again across northern England, into Wales, into southwest England. Thick enough still for some patchy rain and drizzle at times. Clearer skies across the far southeast of England, where temperatures will quickly fall away and we'll see a touch of frost developing. Elsewhere, holding on to a lot of cloud as we go into Monday morning, but we'll start to see outbreaks of rain across parts of Scotland come the early hours. So for most places underneath the cloud, temperatures generally holding up, so frost-free, but across the far southeast of England and into East Anglia, we could wake up to a touch of frost on Monday morning. But for most of England and Wales, it's going to be a largely dry Monday. Hazy spells of sunshine for some and perhaps the odd shower across the far south. But across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland in particular, turning increasingly wet and windy with heavy spells of rain to come, but mild here with temperatures up to 10 or 11 degrees. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. The former Deputy Prime Minister Damien Green joins me in the studio now. Lovely to see you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming in. What do you think then? Brexit 5 years on, a success or failure?
Well, I think you can't blame everything that's happened in Britain over the past 5 years, which has not been a happy time, on Brexit. I think a lot of these sort of economic arguments about would the economy have been better or worse are, in the end, people drawing charts on a graph and saying this is what happened, so this is going to happen, as though it's a straight line, and it isn't. And I think, you know, my overall conclusion is that in a weird way, we will never know what the immediate effect of Brexit could have been, should have been, because of COVID. That actually the economic effects of COVID are massively bigger than the economic effects of Brexit.
Although you could argue that when you were alongside Theresa May, she could have negotiated a better deal than the Chequers one. That was a period well before COVID. Boris Johnson's side of the fence will argue, you know, we were handed a hospital pass, we delivered the best withdrawal agreement we could, but the whole thing was bungled from the beginning.
Well, I think it may be that there was no sensible deal that could have been got through the British Parliament at that stage.
Yes.
I mean, I voted for the various votes where Theresa's deal didn't go through. And I think, I mean, the truth is her deal and Boris's deal are not that different. And Boris's deal had to be unpicked over Northern Ireland by Rishi. So we can go into the weeds of that, but this is all
but if she'd been a fully-throated Brexiteer at the time of first going into negotiations with Brussels, she would have got a better deal out of them.
Well, there's a case to be made that Boris and Theresa should have been Prime Minister the other way round.
Yes, I think Sir Graham Brady, the former chairman of the 1922, has made that point. He would have been better off from 2016 to 2019, and she would have been better off handling COVID.
Exactly.
Because she was actually quite lockdown sceptic and might have had a more measured approach.
No, she'd had a more measured approach. She certainly wouldn't have had parties at Downing Street.
No, I don't think she has many parties at all, to be fair, but maybe I'm maligning your former colleague. And in general, do you think that the direction of travel for Starmer, I mean, perhaps you can have a bit of an insight into his thinking beyond others because you're both on the side of Remain. He now does seem to be wanting to realign with the EU. He's got Olaf Scholz with him at Chequers today. He's going to Brussels in the week. The mood music very much seems to be aligning with the EU, and even you as a Remainer must admit that seems counterintuitive. The Eurozone and its countries aren't doing brilliantly at the moment. It's not as if the EU has prospered much since we left.
Well, absolutely. I think you described me as a Remainer. That was 10 years ago now.
Yes.
That
Well, how do you describe yourself now?
I'm a Democrat, so I accept the result of the referendum. Yeah. And I never... The difference between me and people like Keir Starmer is that I never thought there should be a second referendum. I thought the referendum campaign was incredibly divisive and harmful for politics in this country, and I absolutely didn't want a second referendum. And I parted company in that with people who I'd campaigned alongside. But you were always in the side of
the party, the sort of one nation group that was always calling for close alignment and close ties with the EU. And I'm saying, in retrospect, just as Project Fear was overcooked, wasn't the value of the EU overcooked when we now see that their economies are sluggish, you know, their leadership has been questioned, and actually all of the growth in the world seems to be coming from a US-wards direction, not from the EU?
Well, we had a good effect on the EU. I mean, I think the EU minus Britain is more inclined to be over-bureaucratic and over-regulatory, all the things people objected to about it.
So you think the EU is poorer for Britain's departure?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people in the EU will accept that as well. Quite a lot of the smaller countries agreed with Britain's broad approach of sort of being more deregulatory and more growth-oriented, and slightly hid behind Britain. So, you know, you can go out there and make yourselves unpopular and argue the case. And, you know, that was fine. That was one of the things Britain did inside the EU. But I think, you know, more interesting is what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. And I think Keir Starmer clearly does want, his phrase is a reset of relations. And it will be interesting, to put it no more strongly than that, to see how he can cope with that in a world with Donald Trump.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you know, people say, well, you know, what are the benefits of Brexit? And people can come up with a list. Even I would argue that if we get to the point where we don't have tariffs on us and the EU does, then that would be a benefit. I mean, I should say, I think Trump is wrong to put tariffs sort of indiscriminately on anyone. I mean, I'm a free trader.
We could be, as you say, we could hit on something here. You know, this guy is an Anglophile. He loves the royal family. He seems to love Britain. I talked to Ian Duncan Smith about it earlier. I don't know if you remember this period where he was flirting with the idea of a free trade deal with the UK. Maybe it aligned with the time that he came over here. He met with Theresa May at Chequers. They held hands. You remember all that? You must have encountered him yourself at that period.
That was after I wasn't in government anymore, so I didn't meet him.
But do you think the Tories missed a trick at the time?
I don't think it was ever seriously on offer, frankly. I think everyone says that doing a trade deal with any US administration takes a long time, not least because their politics often gets gummed up and quite sclerotic, so we wouldn't have got one. And the fact that Donald Trump says something one day doesn't necessarily mean that he still believes it the following day, let alone the following year. So I don't think there was ever a serious deal on the table. But I do think Britain should try and have trade deals with the big economies of the world, India and America particularly. And if Trump wants that now, then that would be a good thing for the UK to go for.
What do you make of Kemi Badenoch's performance in office so far? I made the point earlier to Andrew Griffith. Maybe it's a problem that actually Nigel Farage has got better links to the White House right now than she has. And then there was another piece in the Sunday Mirror. I ask you this because you've always been a firm backer of Kemi's. There's a piece in the Sunday Mirror. I appreciate it's the Sunday Mirror and not necessarily friendly to the Conservatives, but they went to Harlow East, which they made the point was a very true blue constituency, and half the people they vox pop there hadn't heard of her. There's this criticism that she hasn't had the cut through. What do you think? Are we judging her too soon? Or?
Yes, I think that criticism is overdone. That leader of the opposition taking over after the worst election defeat forever is a very difficult job. And I think her strategy of proceeding slowly, of getting the public to recognise that this is, as it were, a new administration in charge of the Tory party and that we're not going to have detailed policies yet, is exactly right.
But does she have time to do that? Because she's got, unlike Thatcher, comparisons have been made, it took her some time to establish herself and become a kind of credible force on the right and to be listened to by the public. But she didn't have another righty breathing down her neck. She didn't have Reform and Nigel Farage actually ahead of the Tories in polls.
Yeah, I think the polls are interesting in that, although, people go up and down, but basically you've got three parties on about 25% at the moment. And that itself is quite interesting for the electoral system. A first past the post electoral system struggles to cope with that, but that's a different issue. And clearly what's happened is that this government's support has collapsed extraordinarily quickly for a newly elected government.
Do you think that's baked in?
And a lot of that has gone to Reform. I don't think it is baked in because I think people are less tribal than they used to be. So I think polls are likely to be much more volatile. I do think it would be a mistake for people to get overexcited about a sort of 1 month run of polls. And as I say, I think Kemi's strategy of doing it with a view to an election in 4 years' time, having her whole strategy based on that, is perfectly sensible. And it's what sensible opposition parties who have successfully overturned an incumbent government have done in the past.
Do you think that the era of one nation conservatism is over? I ask you that because we've got Nigel Farage gaining momentum. We've got Kemi Badenoch, who's associated with being quite right-wing, at least on sort of culture war and other issues. The losers in all this are progressive Conservatives. Maybe you count yourself as one. We've witnessed recently a spat between your former One Nation colleague, Rory Stewart, and J.D. Vance. The right is reconstituting itself. And this idea of being a sort of, if we can put it, a left-wing Tory doesn't seem to be very popular anymore.
It's not fashionable, but...
well, have you still got relevance, do you think, in the political scheme?
I think there's a
or
wide...
should you, just as Farage suggests, go and join the Liberal Democrats if you're going to be a left-wing Tory?
I think there's a wider point that, and I don't think any Conservative should take advice from Nigel Farage, whose life aim is to destroy the Conservative Party. Yeah, but in terms of the Conservative Party, he leads another political party. He wants to damage the Conservative Party. But and in a first past the post electoral system, any party that says let's narrow our appeal is mad. You do want to broaden your appeal, and the cliche is aeroplanes, birds, and political parties need two wings to fly. You need to keep a broad range of appeal within the party.
I know, but you need both wings flying in the same direction.
But there is a wider point about, I agree, about centrist politics, if you like, whether it's New Labour politics in this country or moderate conservatism, which is not the flavour of the month, because the the governments, and this is not just a British phenomenon, it's all over the world, centrist governments have been seen not to come out of the COVID sort of catastrophe for the economy very well. And absolutely, it is a job to reassert in a new way the relevance of any kind of sort of moderate centrist politics for the 2020s and beyond.
So centrism isn't dead, Mr. Green?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's where the British people basically are.
Well,
That's why it's not dead.
Are they? I think they're probably further to the right. Maybe the centre ground has moved completely. People should be talking about common ground rather than centre ground.
Well, we always say that. Ever since Keith Joseph invented that brilliant phrase.
We should still do it.
That.
I know you're doing a lot of work on social care. I'd love to have you back in, actually, to just talk about that, because you're involved with a think tank on that issue. It's really important to the GB News audience.
It is. I now chair the Social Care Foundation. I'm very happy to come in and talk about
That's an invitation to come back to talk about that very important issue. Thank you very much, Damien Green. Coming up next, again, to mark 5 years since Brexit, we're going to be speaking to the author, Ross Clarke, who has crunched some of the numbers. Project Fear didn't quite materialise, but just how damaging to the British economy has Brexit been? Stay tuned for that. Back in just a jiffy.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello. Well, it's rather unsettled across the central Mediterranean. Heavy showers, rain in parts of Spain as well, but there are some drier spells. So across the Canary Islands, we'll see some showers, but across Gibraltar and the south of Spain, some outbreaks of rain here. An area of low pressure will bring some heavy showers and thunderstorms across central parts of the Mediterranean, but there will be some drier spells in between. And then looking ahead, well, plenty of sunshine on offer, and it should be feeling pleasant in that sunshine too.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Newly released MI5 files reveal that Queen Elizabeth II was kept in the dark over the treachery of a senior courtier.
Yeah, for almost a decade. This is Sir Anthony Blunt, who played a double life passing intelligence, the KGB, during World War II as a senior MI5 officer. But, remarkably, he was allowed to keep his position amid fears of a major scandal if the truth came out.
Well, now those files have been released by the National Archives, which includes the Queen's response to finding out a trusted member like Anthony Blunt was really a traitor.
Well, joining us now in the studio is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Good to see you this morning, Cameron. This is astonishing.
Oh, absolutely. And this wasn't a little spy. This was Anthony Blunt was a full-blown spy. He passed to the Soviets the D-Day deception plans during the Second World War. He was working for MI5, but a double agent for the KGB as well.
The wrong plans.
He passed on the plans.
The wrong ones.
The wrong one in 1944. Yeah. Exactly. But he then got a job inside Buckingham Palace as one of the Queen's most trusted aides and courtiers, the surveyor of her art, essentially like kind of an art advisor for her late Majesty. There was always suspicions about Anthony Blunt way back in the early 50s because he was part of this notorious Cambridge spy ring, a group of 5 boys recruited at Cambridge. 2 of these people fled to Moscow in 1951. Anthony stayed behind in London and subsequently got a job inside Buckingham Palace, and it wasn't until 1964 that he confessed to his treachery. The reason he confessed was because he was granted immunity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The journalist and author Ross Clark joins me now in the studio. Remind us of the brilliant name of your book.
Far from Utopia.
Far from Utopia, which is genius. So let's drill into some stats, because there are still rows, aren't there? We're nearly 10 years on from the referendum, still rows over whether it has been economically calamitous. Project Fear didn't really materialise. How disastrous do you think Brexit has been economically?
I think it is like a boring 0-0 draw between lower league clubs on a grim Saturday afternoon in November.
Yes.
Our economy is, you know, in the soup, basically. But then look across the channel and it's the same there. You know, UK and French economies up about 2% from before COVID. German economy is flatlining, although it did better before that. You know, the story really behind Brexit is the EU and the UK are sort of locked in this cycle of decline. Meanwhile, the US sort of sails ahead.
Yes. Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, from past 25 years, the US economy has been growing at about 0.5% a year faster than Europe. Main economies. It doesn't sound a lot, but compounded over 25 years, you know, it's made about a sort of 20% gap in the, you know, US economy is already bigger than UK, but than Europe, but it's grown
and
by
this
that
is
another
growth,
fifth.
Regardless of whether the government in power has been Democrat or Republican.
Yes.
So what lessons should we be learning from this? I mean, I think the frustration of Leavers is that we were promised a bit more of an American-style approach, weren't we? Let's try and keep taxes down. Let's try and keep red tape down. Let's try and liberalise our economy to a certain extent. Let's be attractive to overseas investors. None of that has really happened. I keep on citing the 6% rise in corporation tax, but it was almost emblematic. There was all this talk in the campaign, you know, we can be as competitive as Ireland, we can attract foreign investment, and then we've made ourselves less attractive since Brexit, not more, which seems to be counterintuitive.
Yeah, I know we were going to be Singapore on Thames, if you remember, but we've ended up being Brussels on Thames. I mean,
well, have we really? Is it that bad, Ross?
Well, I mean, even worse in some respects. I mean, we've sort of, you know, having made the referendum about take back control and we're going to make our own regulations, we're going to be lighter touch, more business friendly. You look at something like the zero emission vehicle mandate, which is sort of killing our car industry by insisting that 28% of vehicles sold this year are pure electric. Well, that is a more severe target than the EU has set its car manufacturing.
Do you know what? This is a point that my father makes if he's watching. Why do we always seem to want to adhere to these rules and regulations more strictly than actual European countries? Why are we always the ones to sign up and to follow it by the letter? The likes of Spain and Greece don't bother to follow these regulations as religiously as we do.
No, I mean, not, of course, the people that we have in power at the moment are not necessarily people who back Brexit. But even the people who did back Brexit, we had Boris Johnson as Prime Minister for, 3 years. During that time, what deregulation did he bring about? What advantage of Brexit did he...
mentioned his Tigger report, which I think stayed on Boris Johnson's desk unopened for about 18 months. What do you make of Starmer? Do you think he wants to re-enter into at least a degree of realignment with the EU, if only by stealth?
Well, that's the way it seems, isn't it? There's this talk of sort of re-entering some kind of customs union.
Yes.
Well, you know, the EU hasn't changed. It's going to take the same approach as it did during Brexit. If we want to be inside any part of the tent, it's going to want to grab us wholly into the tent and put us under its regulatory orbit and, stop us doing our own thing. If you're in a customs union with the EU, you can't then do trade deals with other countries outside the EU. And we've made a start with that. We've made a start with Australia, New Zealand.
Yes.
And we're negotiating one with India.
Hopefully negotiate one with Trump.
Well, exactly. This has been the big prize of staying outside the EU, is the potential to do a trade deal with the US, which is already actually our largest single trading partner.
We're meant to be worried about chlorine-washed chicken, though, Ross.
The fuss over chlorine-washed chicken is absolutely typical. It tells a story about what are called non-tariff barriers, at which the EU is an absolute master.
Yes.
I mean, theoretically, we have this free trade deal with the EU, but then if you're a small company trying to export some cheese to the EU, for example, there's masses of regulations.
Yes.
And, you know, over sort of their claim to be in terms of health and safety, but of course what they're there really to do is to protect European producers. Now, we eat chlorine-washed salad all the time.
Well, to be fair, I don't think any holiday makers go to Florida and not have a chicken burger on the basis it might be chlorine-washed.
Exactly what I was going to say. It's a fuss over nothing. It's that kind of thing which is brought up in order to thwart free trade, and we can break free of that kind of stuff. And we could actually do a trade deal with the US to the mutual benefit of both countries.
And final question, I think we've probably only got about 45 seconds to answer it, Ross. Immigration. Has Brexit made it worse, leaving the Dublin Agreement, or is that a bit of a red herring? Well,
Brexit itself didn't change anything. I mean, you know, Brexit just created a blank page and we could do what we want with it. But the policy which Boris Johnson's government followed and then has been followed by others is very much towards increasing migration from outside the EU. So, you know, it's that rather than Brexit itself which has allowed immigration to get out of control. As opposed to bad policies necessarily. In terms of Brexiteers, I mean, apparently we're all meant to be feeling regrets, but actually I think we've come to the conclusion during the course of this 90-minute show that if it had been better executed, we'd all be in a better place. Well, I think it's always true that the problems with Brexit were always going to come up front, the greater friction in trade. The benefits were always going to be longer term. It depends how government, you know, used our newfound freedoms, and we haven't used those freedoms yet. We haven't used our freedom. You heard it here on The Shade today. Well, I'll be back next week at 9:30, but coming up next, of course, is Michael Portillo. Stay tuned for him, and please do enjoy the rest of your Sunday. See you next week.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For a chance to win an iPhone, vouchers and £10,000 in cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the